There was a little girl who had never been called my daughter. She dreamed of sunlight through curtains, a gentle hug, but had never known such things. Then one day, fate made a mistake. She arrived at Green Hollow, a place where no one had meant to need her. And yet, from that mistake, something quietly began to bloom. This isn't just Evelyn's story. It's the story of all of us, lost souls, quietly hoping for a place we can finally call home. At the end of a red dirt road that curled gently through groves of maple and soft, grassy meadows, there was a place known simply as Maple Hollow. Spring came there like a whisper, and autumn swept through with winds that carried old fairy tales. In a quiet corner of this village, nestled among apple trees and golden wheat, lived two siblings who had long forgotten what surprise felt like. Jonathan Whitley and his younger sister, Clara Whitley. Their farm, known to the locals as Golden Brook, was named for the small stream that glittered like spun gold beneath the afternoon sun. Jonathan was a gentle man, silent and steady, like the earth beneath one's feet. Clara was different, sharp-minded, precise-structured, with no time for daydreams. Their life was made of rhythm and habit, milking cows, harvesting apples, mending linens, reading books by lantern light, and slowly aging beside the seasons. But then a small decision unraveled everything. Clara noticed Jonathan was growing tired each morning. His shoulders drooped with the quiet weight of years. After much thought, they agreed to adopt a child, a boy from the orphanage who could help around the farm. A sturdy, quiet boy. Clara had written the letter herself. A boy 11 or 12. Doesn't have to be clever, just polite and hardworking. And so one cold May afternoon, Jonathan rode to the train station to collect the boy. But fate often prefers its stories told with a twist. The train arrived slowly, trailing ribbons of silver smoke that curled like dreams into the blue sky. When the doors opened, it wasn't a boy who stepped onto the platform, but a girl. A thin, delicate figure with flaming red hair, a patched-up cloth bag clutched in her hands, and cheeks flushed like spring magnolias. Jonathan blinked in surprise. The girl looked up at him, her eyes glowing like lakes kissed by starlight. "You must be Mr. Whitley," she said, her voice lilting like the beginning of a lullaby. He nodded, still speechless. She didn't wait. "I'm Evelyn Breyer. I'm so happy to meet you. I've never seen a place this beautiful before. Look at those trees, and the clouds like wedding dresses floating across the sky. I hope this will be my forever home." Jonathan stood still, bewildered, yet oddly touched. She didn't just speak, she painted. Her words danced in the air like butterflies, And somehow, between the steam and the dust, something in him softened. Clara was not so easily swayed. When Evelyn stepped into the kitchen at Golden Brook, sat straight-backed on the old wooden chair, and began marveling aloud about cloud bunnies and magical breezes, Clara's mouth tightened. When Jonathan explained the mix-up, they sent a girl, not a boy, Clara nearly dropped the teapot. "This is a mistake," she said. Voice clipped. "We asked for a boy." "She'll be going back first thing in the morning." Evelyn paused. No one had promised she'd be staying, but she had dared to hope. The moment she'd seen the ivy-covered house, the winding lane bathed in golden dusk, the creek whispering behind the trees, she had imagined this was the answer to her prayers. I understand," she murmured, eyes cast down. No tears, no pleading, just a quiet nod, like an autumn leaf falling alone. Jonathan couldn't stop watching her. He saw the way she touched the tablecloth gently, like it held secrets. He noticed how she gazed at every corner of the house, with reverence, from the crooked old painting to the oil lamp glowing softly by the hearth. She didn't see with eyes. She saw with a heart hungry to belong. That night, in the tiny attic room, with its iron bed and round window, looking over the orchard, Evelyn didn't cry. She sat on her blanket arms around her knees, watching the stars. "Dear God," she whispered to the sky, "if this is home, please let them see who I really am." Downstairs, Clara couldn't sleep. Her heart argued with her mind. She didn't dislike the girl, but she didn't understand her. Clara had never known what to do with softness, with poetry, with fragile hope that fluttered like a candle in the wind. And yet, something in Evelyn's voice haunted her. In the early morning, Clara climbed the attic stairs and opened the door. Evelyn was watching dew collect on the apple branches outside the window. "You may stay," Clara said, neither gently nor harshly. "But I won't be spoiling you." Evelyn turned her face, lighting with a quiet sunrise. "I'll do my very best," she said. "I promise." There were no trumpets, no fanfare, just the first true smile Evelyn had allowed herself to feel. A smile of someone who had nearly given up on being wanted and finally was. And so began the story of Evelyn Breyer, the girl no one expected, the mistake that wasn't a mistake at all. She didn't arrive with grand entrance or celebration. Just a worn-out bag, a heart full of dreams, and the kind of spirit that can turn silence into song. And in doing so, she began to gently untie the knots in two hearts that had forgotten how to open. The attic room was small, barely wide enough for the iron bed, a narrow dresser with peeling paint, and a single round window that blinked out over the orchard. But to Evelyn Breyer, it was a kingdom. The very first morning she woke at Golden Brook, She stayed still, beneath the quilt, her fingers tracing the ridges of the wooden headboard as if it were carved from magic. Outside, the apple trees glowed with a soft fog. The world felt quiet in a way Evelyn had never known, like everything was waiting for her to breathe first. She sat up barefoot on the cold floor and whispered to no one, "Don't wake up yet, Evelyn. This might still be a dream." Downstairs, Clara Whitley moved through her morning like a clock wound tight. Biscuits in the oven, coffee brewing dark. Jonathan, as usual, sat with the newspaper but barely read. His thoughts wandered back upstairs. Would she behave? Would she, lest Evelyn appeared a moment later, hair brushed carefully, boots laced imperfectly, hands folded as if she were approaching royalty. "Good morning, ma'am," she said, with a smile that reached past the room. Clara turned slightly raised one eyebrow. "Don't call me ma'am, just Clara." "Yes, Clara, and sit down. You'll need strength for the day. I won't have lazy girls drifting through their chores." "Yes, Clara." Her voice was clear. Not frightened, not false, just hopeful, earnest. Evelyn sat with grace, even if her elbows kept forgetting the rule about the table. They ate in silence, except for the clink of fork and the soft murmur of doves outside. Evelyn didn't speak unless spoken to, though it seemed she was bursting with words. Her eyes sparkled each time the wind knocked on the windows. Her whole body tilted toward wonder. After breakfast, Clara handed Evelyn a dusting cloth and pointed toward the front parlor. "You'll start in there. No daydreaming, no humming, no touching the piano. Do your work and do it properly." "Yes, Clara." Evelyn marched to her task like a soldier in a fairy tale. The parlor was cold from the night and smelled faintly of rosewood and books. She began dusting, careful not to disturb the rows of carefully stacked volumes or the collection of porcelain swans lining the shelves. But her heart, oh, her heart, was already dancing. In every corner, she imagined stories. The bookshelf became a fortress, the fireplace a dragon's cave, the floral rug beneath her feet a carpet to distant kingdoms. When she reached the piano, her fingers twitched. She hadn't touched one since the last foster house. That piano had belonged to a woman who never smiled. Evelyn had taught herself to play soft, secret songs in the middle of the night until the woman found out and locked the lid shut with a rusted key. This one had no lock. Just as her fingers hovered over the ivory keys, Clara's voice rang like a bell from the hallway. I said no, touching the piano. Evelyn flinched. Yes, Clara. But later that evening, alone in the parlor, while the wind moaned low, Evelyn sat on the bench and touched one key. Just one. A soft, delicate F sharp. It rang like a secret released into the air, She smiled and never told anyone. Jonathan watched her with quiet curiosity. She didn't complain, though she scrubbed floors and sorted potatoes with fingers red from cold. She didn't argue, though. Clara's tone left no room for warmth. And she didn't once ask for anything. No second helpings, no soft blankets, no stories before bed. Instead, Evelyn gave. She gave compliments to the chickens, gave names to the trees, gave light where silence used to live. One afternoon, Jonathan passed by the barn and heard her talking, not to a person, but to the horse. "You, Sir Cedric, are a noble steed," she said, brushing the animal's coat. "Someday, we'll gallop across golden fields and rescue lost princesses. Won't we?" Sir Cedric whinnied as if he understood. Jonathan chuckled under his breath. He began leaving small things by her door. A sprig of mint, a crumpled book of poems, an old scarf with green stitching, never signed, never mentioned. But each morning, Evelyn found them and smiled as if the world had gifted her treasure. Then came the day she met Lila Morgan. It was Sunday, and Clara insisted they attend service in town, like respectable people do. Evelyn wore a dress Clara had let out at the seams, her red hair braided, tight boots freshly polished. The town was a painting, come to life, white fences, tidy lawns, and rows of daffodils singing in the breeze. At the chapel, she met rows of quiet strangers. But one girl turned to stare, a girl with dark curls and eyes like melted chocolate. "I'm Lila," she said after the hymn ended. "You're new." "Yes," Evelyn said, hands twisting in her lap. I live at Golden Brook now, with the Whitleys." Lila tilted her head. "They've never had a girl before." Evelyn blushed. "I'm just temporary." "No one is temporary once they're here," Lila said. "Come, I'll show you where the violets bloom after service." And just like that, Evelyn had a friend. From that day on, Maple Hollow grew warmer. Lila and Evelyn became shadows of one another, skipping through meadows and whispering secrets into tree bark. They made crowns from clover, sang lullabies to ducklings, invented a language only they understood. But even then, Evelyn didn't forget her place. Each night, she folded her clothes, brushed her hair, whispered thanks to her window before sleep. She knew happiness was fragile, like dandelion fluff on the wind. Clara noticed, of course, the girl had not once misbehaved. And yet Clara remained guarded. It wasn't that she disliked Evelyn. It was that she didn't understand her. Evelyn felt too much, spoke like a poem, carried wounds Clara couldn't name. One evening, Jonathan said gently, "You see how she looks at this place, like she's finally breathing for the first time." Clara said nothing. But that night, she lingered longer at the attic door. She almost knocked. Almost. Evelyn had a secret place. a grove behind the barn where wildflowers grew in half-moons around a broken tree stump. She called it the heart of the earth. There she planted a small stone she'd carried from the orphanage, one she had held during lonely nights. She whispered to it, "Stay here now. This is where my story begins." She didn't know that beneath that same stump, Jonathan had once buried his favorite toy as a child, or that Clara had sat there one summer and cried when their parents died. Somehow, hearts find each other across time, and Evelyn's heart was learning to belong. By the end of that first month, Evelyn no longer tiptoed in the hallway. She sang softly while sweeping. She asked permission to help with baking and whispered to the cows as if they were old friends. She even told Clara one morning that the apple trees were starting to dream again. Clara had raised an eyebrow, but didn't scold. Instead, she handed Evelyn a fresh apron. Not the ragged one she'd been using, but a proper one, pale blue, with little embroidered daisies. Evelyn stared at it, as if it were made of sunlight. "For me, for your work," Clara said. But Evelyn knew better. It was a beginning, and she wore it like a crown. The first day of school dawned with a sky the color of porcelain and a breeze soft as cotton. Evelyn Breyer stood at the edge of the Golden Brook Gate, her books pressed against her chest like a shield. Her braids were neater than usual, her dress freshly ironed, and the blue apron Clara had given her fluttered like a promise around her knees. "You'll walk with the Morgan girl," Clara had said. "Stay polite. Don't be dramatic." Jonathan simply added, "Remember who you are, but don't be afraid to show it." Evelyn nodded. She wasn't sure what she was more afraid of, being invisible or being seen. Lila Morgan was waiting near the maple grove, her smile full of mischief and morning dew. "You look like spring," Lila declared, but nervous. "Don't worry. The teacher's stern but fair, and the lunch bell rings like freedom." Evelyn laughed, soft and uncertain. The walk to school was lined with curious glances. Some children whispered, others stared. Evelyn kept her head high, pretending her boots were made of clouds, pretending her heart wasn't trembling like a bird in a storm. The schoolhouse itself was a white rectangle with tall windows, a bell tower above the porch, and a swing creaking in the breeze. Inside, desks gleamed under the sun, and chalk dust danced in quiet corners. "Miss Evelyn Breyer," said Mr. Randall Graves. The teacher, a tall man with sharp spectacles and a voice that echoed even when he whispered, "You'll sit near the window, beside Mr. Blake Hart." Evelyn turned and met the eyes of her first true rival. Blake Hart was everything Evelyn was not. Calm, reserved, brilliant in a way that didn't need words. His dark hair curled behind his ears, and he carried his books like a soldier, carried his blade, precise, practiced, focused. He barely looked at her when she sat down. That should have been the end of it. But halfway through the lesson, as Mr. Graves explained fractions with impatient chalk strokes, Evelyn raised her hand. "Sir," she said, "wouldn't it be more useful to describe it like sharing apples? 2 children, 6 slices. It would make more sense to the younger students." The room fell silent. Mr. Graves blinked. Blake smirked. "She talks too much," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Evelyn flushed. Her voice, her ideas, things she had always used as armor, now felt like invitations for arrows. She said nothing the rest of the morning, but a fire had begun to burn. During recess, Lila tried to cheer her. "Don't mind Blake," she whispered. "He's just not used to anyone else having ideas." "I wasn't trying to show off," Evelyn said quietly. "I know," Lila replied. "But he thinks he owns the top of the class. You startled him." That night, Evelyn sat at the attic window, stars blinking above the orchard. Her fingers curled around her pencil as she scribbled into her notebook. "If a tree grows tall, must it ignore the songbirds that land on its branches? Or can the strong still make room for the curious?" She underlined the words twice and closed the book with resolve. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn changed. She didn't stop dreaming, but she learned to aim her dreams like arrows. She answered questions with clarity. Her essays danced with metaphors, yet never drifted from truth. She memorized arithmetic while hanging laundry. She quoted poetry while hauling pails of water. Blake noticed. He didn't admit it, but he began sitting straighter when she raised her hand. He glanced at her paper during quizzes. Once, when she solved a geometry riddle he had struggled with, he stared at her for a full 5 seconds, then looked away, jaw tight. The rivalry had begun, and Evelyn, to her own surprise, didn't mind. Clara noticed the difference too. The girl who once tread the halls like a guest now moved like she belonged. She still whispered to the cows and named every squirrel. But now she also brought home perfect spelling tests and stories that left Jonathan teary-eyed. One evening, Clara found a note tucked under her napkin. It read, "I don't know if you ever wanted a daughter, but if I were to be one, I hope I'm the kind you'd be proud of." Clara folded the note carefully, said nothing, but the next morning, she packed Evelyn's lunch with a red apple and 2 sugar cookies. Just because. Then came the harvest fair. It was the grandest event in Maple Hollow, a festival of pumpkins, quilts, jam contests, and the school-wide essay competition. The theme this year, what it means to belong. Blake had won the last 2 years. Everyone expected him to win again. Evelyn didn't enter to win. She entered because the prompt whispered to her bones. On the day of the judging, the schoolhouse was filled with parents, pies, and anticipation. Evelyn wore her best dress hair tied back with blue ribbon. Lila squeezed her hand before the results were read, and the winner announced, "Mr. Graves, is Miss Evelyn Breyer for her essay titled "The Shape of a Home." Gasps, whispers. Blake's jaw tightened, but Evelyn, she just stood frozen. It wasn't pride. She felt it was something quieter, something deeper, as if a door she'd only ever knocked on had finally opened, and she was being welcomed in. Afterward, Blake approached her near the lemonade stand. "You write like you mean it," he said, looking at his shoes. Evelyn tilted her head. "Isn't that the point?" He cracked a smile. "Maybe. I'll try harder next time." She extended a hand. "Friends?" He hesitated, then took it. "Rivals," he said with a grin. "But friends, too." And just like that, the fire between them changed shape from competition to connection. That night, Evelyn placed the ribbon from the fair on her bedside table. It wasn't the prize that mattered. It was the story she had written. The story of finding home, not in a place, but in being seen, in being heard, in being enough. Golden Brook no longer felt borrowed. It felt earned. It felt hers. And as the moon painted silver across her pillow, Evelyn Breyer fell asleep, knowing she wasn't just a guest in this world anymore. She was part of its unfolding tale. It was a Tuesday afternoon when everything unraveled, the kind of day where the clouds hung low but held no rain, and the classroom windows fogged with the breath of restless minds. Evelyn Breyer sat near the back, her braids still damp from the morning mist, pencil tapping softly against the desk. Mr. Graves was drawing diagrams on the blackboard, something about river erosion. But Evelyn wasn't listening. Her thoughts drifted toward a story she'd started writing in the margins of her notebook. A tale of a lost princess who spoke to owls and made maps from starlight. She was just outlining a scene when it happened. Carrot. One word. Sharp. Thoughtless. And loud enough for the entire room to hear. Evelyn froze. She turned slowly, eyes locking with Blake Hart, who looked oddly regretful even before she reacted. The class erupted into laughter. Carrot Top, did you hear that? Someone whispered. The world narrowed. Her hands clenched. Her ears burned. She stood up so fast, her chair scraped across the floor like a scream. "How dare you?" she said, her voice trembling, not with weakness, but with fury. "How dare you mock what I cannot change?" Blake opened his mouth, but it was too late. Without a second thought, Evelyn raised her slate, and crack brought it down across his head. Gasps. Silence. Mr. Graves dropped his chalk. Blake sat stunned, hand to his temple, more surprised than hurt. Evelyn blinked and realized what she'd done. She was sent home immediately. Clara opened the door to find her pale, teary, silent. Jonathan stood from his chair, eyes filled with concern. "Explain," Clara demanded, but Evelyn couldn't speak. Not yet. She walked upstairs without a word, each step heavier than the last. In the attic room, she sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her hands. They had never struck anyone before. She had imagined storms, battles, princesses with swords and dragons with scales. But not this, not a cracked slate and a name that burned like fire. Downstairs, Jonathan read the note from Mr. Graves aloud. Evelyn Breyer struck a fellow student during class today in what appeared to be an emotional outburst. While the situation did not result in serious injury, I expect appropriate consequences at home. Clara exhaled slowly. Jonathan said, "She's not a violent girl." "No," Clara agreed. "She's just too full." Too full. Clara looked toward the ceiling, of words, of feelings, of fire. Jonathan smiled faintly. Maybe she's just never had a safe place to hold it all. That evening, Clara entered the attic, with her hands folded, her face unreadable. Evelyn stood, as if awaiting a sentence. "I'm not proud of what you did," Clara began. "I'm sorry," Evelyn whispered. He called me Carrot." "Your hair?" Clara blinked. Evelyn nodded. "I've been teased before, but not by someone I trusted." Clara sat on the bed beside her. Words can wound, but so can slates. The question is, who do you want to be after the hurt? Evelyn's throat tightened. "I want to be someone who isn't so easy to break." Clara looked at her, long and quiet. "Then learn from this." And that was all. The next morning, Evelyn returned to school. Her steps were slower, her gaze softer. She avoided Blake's eyes, unsure if she'd feel guilt or anger or both. At recess, he approached. There was no audience this time. Just the two of them, beneath the old oak. "I didn't mean it," he said. "It just slipped." "That's how most hurtful things happen," she replied. "I was embarrassed. You were winning." "I didn't like it." Evelyn folded her arms. "I know I overreacted. I'm sorry I hit you." He smiled, rubbing his scalp. "You hit hard." They both laughed, quiet and a little shy. Then he said something she didn't expect. "I was wrong." She blinked, and he added, "I think your hair looks like firelight," which is kind of brilliant. For the first time in 2 days, Evelyn smiled. But even forgiveness left scars. She no longer floated in class. She moved with caution, as though her voice needed permission. That fire she once carried so easily now flickered behind her eyes instead of her words. It was Jonathan who helped reignite it. One evening, he brought her a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in linen, was an old ink pen with a silver tip. "This belonged to my mother," he said. She was a writer, too. Thought the world into stories. Evelyn's breath caught. "I want you to have it." "Why me?" "Because you're already doing what she did, turning life into meaning." She hugged him tighter than she ever had. That night, she wrote. She didn't write revenge. She didn't write shame. She wrote about Blake's smile, about firelight, about how one single name could tear you down or build you up, depending on the hands that held it. And she titled the piece, The Things We Don't Say Sorry For, But Should. Clara read it quietly the next day, without Evelyn knowing. Later, she placed a new notebook on Evelyn's pillow, wrapped in brown paper. Inside, she had written, "Fill this with all the fire you don't know where to keep." By the end of the term, Evelyn had become something else. Not less emotional, not quieter, just stronger, wiser, able to hold pain and peace in the same palm. Blake no longer called her anything but Evelyn. And though their rivalry still burned, it had cooled into something respectful, even kind, and Evelyn learned something. Her stories had never taught her that growing up wasn't about losing yourself. It was about forgiving the parts of yourself you once thought you had to hide. Spring arrived like a whispered secret. Golden Brook awoke in shades of soft green and white blossoms. The apple trees shimmered with promise, and Clara's kitchen smelled of cinnamon and clean linen. Evelyn Breyer moved through the house like sunlight, still quiet in moments, but more herself again. Her laughter had returned carefully at first, but now spilling through windows and into the breeze. Lila visited, often skipping up the porch steps with books and stories. The two of them would spend hours curled on the attic rug, reading poetry and pretending to be queens in exile. It was during some of these afternoons that the invitation arrived. It came on stiff cream paper, addressed in looping cursive to Clara Whitley. Tea at the Berry Estate, 2 o'clock Sunday. Miss Evelyn Breyer, most welcome. Kindly RSVP. Clara read it twice before handing it to Evelyn. "You're being invited," she said, her voice unreadable. Evelyn stared. "To the Berries." Clara gave a small nod. Their old money, polished, reserved. "Don't embarrass yourself." Evelyn straightened her back. "I'll behave like a lady." Clara raised one brow. "Behaving isn't the same as pretending." Evelyn grinned. "Then I'll do both." On Sunday, the Berry home glowed with glass windows and careful ivy. Their parlor was filled with crystal pitchers, embroidered napkins, and a sense that every cushion had been fluffed just so. Lila met her at the door with a whisper. "I've told Mother you're charming." Evelyn smiled. "Let's hope I stay that way." The tea began with quiet conversation. Jam biscuits, tiny cucumber sandwiches, and delicate glasses filled with a crimson liquid. "Grape cordial," said Mrs. Berry. "Very sweet, very safe." Evelyn took a cautious sip. It was stronger than she expected, but oddly delicious. By the second glass, her words began to drift like petals. By the third, she was giggling. By the fourth, she was gone. It was only when Lila found her, sprawled in the guest room, singing to a decorative goose pillow, that the truth crashed in. Mother Lila shouted, "I think she's drunk." Mrs. Berry arrived, scandal swelling like a storm. "That wasn't cordial," she gasped. "That was elderberry wine." From the cellar, there were tears. There was noise. There were apologies Evelyn couldn't quite form. And there was a call to Golden Brook. Clara arrived in silence. Her eyes scanned Evelyn, red-faced, slurring, confused, and filled with a fury deeper than words. She didn't speak until they were in the wagon, bouncing down the dirt road. Silence like thunder between them. Evelyn tried. I thought it was juice. Clara said nothing. I didn't mean to embarrass you. Still nothing. And then, softly, I'm sorry I ruined it. Clara glanced at her sharp, but not cruel. You didn't ruin anything. You revealed everything. At home, Evelyn went straight to the attic. She didn't light a candle. She didn't take off her shoes. She curled on the bed like a letter never sent and cried. She cried for the wine, for the look on Clara's face, for the laughter that had turned sour in her throat. But mostly, she cried for that old fear that she didn't belong, that all of this was still borrowed, still fragile, and that maybe one mistake could shatter it all. Downstairs, Clara stood in the kitchen, hands braced on the sink. The moonlight made her reflection look younger, sadder. Jonathan approached, quiet as always. She's just a girl, he said. She made a fool of herself. Clara replied, she trusted them, and she drank what was handed to her. Clara didn't answer, but her grip on the sink eased. The next morning, Evelyn didn't come down for breakfast. By midday, Clara entered the attic. Evelyn sat on the floor, holding a glass of water with both hands, as if it were fragile. I've never been so ashamed, she said. Clara sat beside her. Not close, but not far either. Did you drink it on purpose? No. Did you know what it was? No. Clara studied her face. The puffiness, the fear. Then why are you punishing yourself? Evelyn didn't know. Maybe because she'd been punished before by the system, by circumstance, by people who made her feel like a burden. And now, when she failed, she thought she had to punish herself first before anyone else could. Clara said quietly, I was angry. Not because you were foolish, but because I care. And I didn't know I did. Evelyn's breath caught. I care, Evelyn, more than I wanted to. And that more than any scolding, more than any silence, broke her. She leaned against Clara's shoulder and cried again, but this time with relief. The scandal didn't last. Mrs. Barry, ever eager to preserve decorum, declared it a misunderstanding, a simple mistake, a mix-up in the bottles. But the story spread as stories do. Evelyn returned to school, a little smaller, a little softer, but she also returned with a strength newly forged. She apologized to Lila, who forgave her. She met the whispers with quiet dignity. And Blake? He simply offered her a grape juice box one afternoon and said, Don't get drunk on this. She laughed, then threw it at him. Friendship restored. In time, the attic felt warmer. Evelyn wrote more. She wrote about mistakes and mercy, about how embarrassment could plant seeds of empathy. Clara began letting her help with baking, with bills, with real things. And one evening, as they kneaded bread together, Clara said, Next week, the harvest sale. I'll need your help running the stand." Evelyn blinked. "Me? You live here, don't you?" And in those 6 words, Evelyn heard what no letter of adoption had ever said. She was part of this family, not in name, not in law, but in the quiet, sacred language of trust. The world felt like it was opening. It was late spring, and the orchard behind Golden Brook had exploded into bloom. White petals danced like snowflakes in the sunlight, and Evelyn Breyer walked among them with a notebook in one hand and a pencil behind her ear. Everything felt lighter. Now school home, even Clara's stern glances. There was something in the air, something Evelyn couldn't name, but she felt it in her bones. Possibility. At school, the year was drawing to a close, and with it came the biggest academic announcement of the year: the Avon Wood Academy. Scholarship, a full ride to a prestigious college preparatory school in the city. No one expected Evelyn to enter. No one except Mr. Graves. He handed her the form quietly after class one day. "You're more than ready," he said, "but I'm just a farm girl." "Exactly," he replied. "You see the world in ways the others don't. That's the kind of mind they want and need." She took the form home, her hands shaking slightly. That night in the attic, she wrote her essay by candlelight. It began, "I have never had a last name that carried weight, but I have carried stories, like seeds in my pockets, planting them where no one thought flowers could grow." She signed it simply, Evelyn Breyer Golden Brook. The weeks that followed were filled with waiting while pretending not to hope. Clara said little, but Evelyn could feel her watching how often she opened the mailbox, how quiet she became in the evenings. Then, one afternoon, the letter arrived. She read the first sentence aloud on the porch, barely breathing. "It is with great pride that we award you this year's Avonwood Scholarship." Jonathan stood. Clara froze. Evelyn dropped the letter and ran straight into Jonathan's arms. "I got in," she whispered into his shoulder. "I really got in." He didn't speak for a moment, just held her. Then he said, "You were always meant for more." And Evelyn cried, not because she was leaving, but because she suddenly realized how deeply she had come to love staying. For days, joy filled the house like sunlight. Clara baked pies without comment. Jonathan polished Evelyn's shoes. Lila visited with congratulations and a string of wildflowers for her hair. Evelyn tried to memorize it all the way. The air smelled the squeak of the attic floorboards, the exact color of the sky over the apple trees. She wrote thank you letters, packed her books, stared at her empty suitcase with a heart full of both pride and dread. But then, everything changed. It began with a cough. Jonathan, who never complained, who worked through storms and snow, began to sit down more often. Then he began to nap during the day. Clara noticed. Evelyn pretended not to. Until the morning, he didn't come down for breakfast. They found him sitting by the window, a book still open on his lap, eyes closed, as if dreaming, but he wasn't breathing. The doctor came. Neighbors, too. There were words spoken. Heart failure. Peaceful quick. None of it mattered, not to Evelyn. She sat on the porch steps, hands in her lap, staring into the trees. The letter from Avonwood still lay on the table, inside, unread for days. The joy of it had vanished like smoke. Clara didn't cry in front of anyone. But that night, Evelyn heard her behind the pantry door, one long, broken sound, and knew they had both lost the person who made everything feel steady. The funeral was small, simple hymns, a plain wooden casket, wild flowers. Evelyn picked herself. She spoke only once, her voice quiet but clear. Jonathan Whitley was the first man who looked at me and saw not just a child, but a soul. He never said much, but in his silence, I heard belief. And in his hand, I found home. People wept. Clara didn't, but she held Evelyn's hand the entire time. The days after blurred. Evelyn tried to help folding sheets, mending socks, cleaning out the barn, where Jonathan used to hum softly while tending the hay. She found an old scarf of his under the bench. It still smelled like cedar. That night, she wore it to bed, curled into herself, and whispered to the darkness, "I don't know how to go without you." Clara came into the attic a few nights later. She didn't knock, just stood there a moment. "I know you haven't made your decision yet," she said. Evelyn sat up. "What decision about Avonwood? You haven't said whether you'll go. I can't leave you. You're not leaving me. You're following what Jonathan wanted, what I want, what you were made for." Evelyn shook her head, eyes glassy. "I feel guilty for being happy, for wanting more." Clara sat down beside her. "There's a kind of grief that tells you to shrink, to stay. But there's another kind, the kind Jonathan believed in, that tells you to go to grow and carry his memory with you." Tears rolled down Evelyn's cheeks. "I'm afraid." Clara took her hand. "So am I." And in the silence that followed, a door quietly opened between them, one built not of shared blood, but of shared love. The next morning, Evelyn wrote her acceptance letter. She sealed it with wax and a sprig of apple blossom and placed it on Jonathan's chair. Summer passed slowly. Clara began letting Evelyn make decisions: what to plant, what to sell, when to rest. They cooked together more, talked more, laughed sometimes. There was pain, stillness, but also something else blooming, something like healing. And when the train came in September, Evelyn stood at the platform, suitcase in hand, scarf around her neck, and whispered, "Thank you, Golden Brook," then stepped on board to the next chapter, carrying a broken heart and a burning light within her. The train pulled into Maple Hollow at dusk. Evelyn Breyer stepped down with her suitcase in one hand and her heart full of things she couldn't name. The station looked the same: wooden benches, a chipped clock ivy curling around the post. But the girl who had once arrived, trembling with hope, was gone. In her place stood a young woman, older, quieter, but burning all the same. Clara was waiting just as she had promised. Her hair was grayer, her frame thinner, but her eyes were steady. "Welcome home," she said. Evelyn smiled. "Is it still mine?" It always was. They didn't hug. Not right away, but as they walked toward the wagon, Evelyn slipped her arm through Clara's, and that was more than enough. Golden Brook hadn't changed much. The orchard still whispered at dawn. The floor still creaked at the third step. The attic still smelled of dust and lavender, but everything felt smaller now. Not because it had shrunk, but because Evelyn had grown. That night, she unpacked in silence, folded her new dresses, lined up her books, then sat by the round window, just like she used to, and whispered, "I'm still me." And somehow, that felt like both a question and a promise. Word of her return spread quickly. Lila arrived the next morning, arms full of daisies and questions. "You look taller," she said. "Wiser, too. Did you fall in love?" Evelyn laughed. "With knowledge. With old libraries. With chocolate cake at midnight. No boys." Evelyn hesitated. There was someone, she said. "But I left before it could mean anything." Lila studied her, and here Evelyn blinked. "Here, Blake." She didn't answer, but her heart did something peculiar. It skipped. They met again a few days later, by accident, of course, at the general store. He turned from the shelf of notebooks and froze. Evelyn, Blake. He looked the same, but taller, broader. His voice deeper. His smile softer. "You're back. Just for the summer," she said. "Maybe longer." He nodded. Silence. "Then I read your piece in the college journal." "You did." "It made me cry and think and want to write again." She smiled. "That's all I ever wanted to make someone feel." He took a breath. "You still do." And just like that, the air between them shifted. Not heavy, not urgent, just open. That summer, they walked through meadows and orchards, through old paths and new conversations. They talked about everything and nothing, about what they feared, what they hoped, what they'd lost. Blake didn't rush. Evelyn didn't hide. They moved slowly, like music, unfolding, like roots growing beneath soil. And one afternoon, beneath the apple tree, where Evelyn used to sit with Jonathan, Blake said quietly, "I used to think you were too much." She looked at him, and now he reached for her hand. "Now I know you're just enough." But love was only part of the return. There was still grief. Clara didn't speak of Jonathan often. But one night, as she and Evelyn shelled peas in silence, she said, "He would have been proud of you." Evelyn's throat tightened. "I hope I've done him justice." "You have." And after a long pause, "So have I." As autumn approached, Evelyn faced a choice. Avonwood had offered her a teaching fellowship. A new city. A new chapter. But her heart tugged in two directions. She walked the orchard again, sat on the porch, read Jonathan's old letters, and then she knew. It wasn't about leaving or staying. It was about answering the question, where does your soul breathe the deepest? For Evelyn, the answer wasn't in titles or cities. It was in Clara's quiet approval, in Blake's steady presence, in the wind through apple branches. It was here, Golden Brook. She turned down the offer and opened a small schoolhouse in town instead. Just one room, 12 children, a blackboard, and a dream. But it was enough, because she was planting something real lasting, a place where stories could begin, just like hers had. Years later, she'd still walk those fields, still write by candlelight, still laugh with Lila, and bake with Clara. And when the leaves turned gold each October, she'd remember the girl who once stepped off a train with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of longing. She'd whisper to the wind, "I found my way," and the wind would answer, "Yes, child, you did." The morning Evelyn Breyer opened the schoolhouse doors, the sky was a soft canvas of lavender and gold. 12 desks waited inside sunlight, slanting across their polished surfaces. The chalkboard had been scrubbed clean. The globe Jonathan once gave her, now dusted and restored, sat proudly in the corner. Evelyn took a deep breath, heart thudding, not from nerves, but reverence. She was here, teaching in the very town where she had once arrived a stranger, where no one had expected her, where she had made a life. The children came in pairs, with squeaky shoes and wild eyes. Some held hands with siblings, some clutched lunch pails like shields. "Good morning," Evelyn said softly. "My name is Miss Breyer." She wrote it on the board, then added in cursive, "This is a place where stories begin." A little boy raised his hand. "Do stories have to be true?" Evelyn smiled. "They only have to be honest." And just like that, the room shifted from stillness to wonder. Outside the classroom, life at Golden Brook had found a rhythm. Clara continued to tend the garden, more slowly now, but still with pride. She had stopped expecting Evelyn to leave. That fear had faded the moment she found Evelyn's books stacked in the living room, her shoes by the door, her laughter echoing off the old beams. Evelyn belonged not as a guest, but as the next chapter of the place itself. Some evenings, they sat on the porch in companionable silence. Other times, they talked, really talked, about Jonathan, about loss, about love that never stops even when breath does. And sometimes Clara would look at Evelyn and say, "I'm glad you came off that train." To which Evelyn always replied, "So am I." Blake Hart became part of that rhythm too. He visited the schoolhouse on Saturdays, helping her build bookshelves, painting the shutters, bringing her ink when she ran out. Their friendship had deepened into something quiet, certain. There was no grand confession, no sweeping declarations, just the gentle unfolding of two souls leaning toward each other. One evening, after repairing a broken drawer, Blake stayed longer than usual. Evelyn poured tea. They sat at the kitchen table, steam curling between them. "I never thought I'd stay here," he said. "Me neither. But I think we were never meant to leave." Evelyn looked down at her hands. then met his eyes. "Do you think," she asked, "we were always meant to meet?" Blake smiled, not wide, not fast, but with that steady warmth she had come to trust. "I don't think anything about you was ever an accident." She reached for his hand, and in that touch, something shifted, like the earth leaning closer to the sun. Summer gave way to fall. The schoolhouse filled with drawings, with laughter, with questions that reminded Evelyn of who she had been. Children brought apples and thank you notes. Parents nodded respectfully in town. She wasn't just Evelyn anymore. She was Miss Breyer, and sometimes she caught glimpses of herself in the window, older, wiser, still burning, and whispered, "You did it. You really did." One rainy afternoon, she found an envelope addressed in Clara's handwriting. Inside was a letter. "Dearest Evelyn, I never asked for a daughter, never planned for one. But if I had been brave enough to dream her, she would have been you. You've taught me what love looks like when it arrives uninvited. What grace sounds like in the voice of a stubborn, dreaming girl who refused to be turned away. Thank you for staying, for forgiving, for growing with more pride than I'll ever say aloud. Clara." Evelyn read it 3 times, then cried in the pantry, just like Clara once had. On the anniversary of Jonathan's passing, she visited his grave alone. She brought apple blossoms and sat cross-legged on the damp grass. "Your chair by the fire is still there," she said, "and your scarf, though it's fraying, and your laugh, it still lives in this place." She placed her hand on the stone. "I'm teaching now, using your old pen, carrying your kindness like a light in my chest." The wind picked up slightly as if in answer, and Evelyn smiled, not from sorrow, but from remembrance. Winter came in quiet steps. Snow dressed the orchard in silence. Clara knitted scarves for the children. Evelyn read poetry aloud in the schoolhouse as frost climbed the windows. Blake helped her string lights across the porch, and one evening, standing beneath them, he kissed her softly, reverently, not as a declaration, but as a beginning. Years would pass. Some things would change. Others never would. Evelyn would keep teaching, keep writing, keep tending to the fire in her soul. Blake would propose not with a ring, but with a question. "Would you like to build forever, here with me?" And she would answer, "I already am." Clara would grow older, but never less proud, and Jonathan's name would be spoken with reverence in every story Evelyn told. Golden Brook would remain weathered, patient, beloved, and in the attic room, where everything began, a new girl would one day sleep, not Evelyn, but a child with the same wonder in her eyes, the same ache to belong, and Evelyn would stand by the doorway and whisper, "You're home now. Just breathe." Because in the end, that was the truth Evelyn had searched for her whole life. Not fame, not escape, but this: to be wanted, to be known, to be rooted in love, not perfect, but permanently, fiercely, forever home. She came as an accident and stayed as a blessing. Evelyn Breyer didn't just find a home, she built one with laughter, with tears, and with a heart that refused to stop hoping. And maybe that's what we're all searching for. Not perfection, not promises, but a place where someone looks at us and simply says, "You belong here. Thank you for joining her journey." And wherever you are tonight, may you find your own green hollow in someone's heart.